Hi everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. Sorry that I missed yesterday, but unforeseen circumstances. So we are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're going to begin today with Tzadik Tes Amid Aleph, which was yesterday's daf in the Dirshu schedule, but we hope to do today Tzadik Tes Amid Aleph and Tzadik Tes Amid Beis. That would cover both yesterday's Dirshu daf and today's Dirshu daf. So we begin today with Siman Taf Tzadik Gimel. Of course, we're continuing Hilchas Pesach, and today we're going to be discussing the Dinim of Sefirah Ha'omer. We begin with Siman Taf Tzadik Gimel, Dinim HaNoihagim Bimei Ha'omer, the halachas that we are accustomed to keeping during the days of the Omer, Ubay Dalet Seifim, and here we have 4 Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Noihagim, the minig is Shaloi Lisa Isha, that we do not marry a woman, we do not make any chasunahs, Bein Pesach La'atzeres, between the Yom Tov of Pesach and the Yom Tov of Shavuos, Ad Lamed Gimel La'omer, until the 33rd day of the Omer, Mipnei Sheba'osei Zman Mesu Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, because it is during that time period that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died in a Magefa. We know that 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva's were nifter during this time period, and it's brought down, they did not treat each other appropriately. They didn't treat each other with the care that was deserving from one Talmid Chacham to another Talmid Chacham. Somehow they didn't treat each other properly, and therefore 24,000 Talmidim died. And it happened during this time period. There's a footnote here in the Dirshu, footnote number 3, says over here, when exactly did this minig begin? So he brings down here 2 different opinions. First, he says, "V'azman shebay hischilu kol Yisrael linoig minhagi avelus elu." What is the time? When did this minig begin? That Klal Yisrael started keeping these dinim of avelus to mourn for the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva during the Omer. Kasav b'sefer Shari Tshuva. He brings down from the Sefer Shari Tshuva, Shehu me'azman shebay mesu Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, that this actually began at that time when the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. From then on, they started keeping a certain amount of avelus during the days of the Omer. However, at the end of the footnote here, he says, he sends you over to the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Aruch HaShulchan actually writes that this was something that was begun in the days of the Gaonim. So it doesn't date all the way back to Rabbi Akiva. The Aruch HaShulchan writes that it dates back to the time period of the Gaonim, but nevertheless, whether it dates back to Rabbi Akiva or to the Gaonim, certainly this is the minig that we have, that during the days of the Omer, and we'll have to discuss which time period. We know that there are different minhagim. However, at some point during the days of the Omer, we noyeg a certain amount of dine avelus, we don't make chasunahs, and as we're going to see, we don't take haircuts. So let's go weiter. Aval, however, says the Mechaber, la'ares ulekadesh shaper dummy. While we don't make a chasunah, we know that a Yiddish marriage takes place in 2 stages. The first stage of a halachadika marriage is called kiddushin, and that's what we colloquially know sort of as marriage, when the chassan takes the ring and gives it to the kala and says Hareat mekudeshes li b'tabasu kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. That's the act of kiddushin, by giving the isha something that's worth at least a shava pruta, and the isha agrees to give herself over to the husband. So the husband is kind of the isha in kiddushin. However, kiddushin is not the end of a chasana. There's a second stage in halacha to complete a marriage, and that's called nisuin. Nowadays, we do kiddushin and nisuin really at the same time. The chassan gives the kala the ring under the chuppah, and then the chuppah, by bringing the kala together with the chassan under the chuppah, or right after the chuppah, by going into yichud together, by putting the chassan and the kala alone in a locked room, and they have yichud together, that's an act of chuppah, and that completes the marriage. That's the act of nisuin. So the Mechaber is telling us over here that while we don't make a nisuin, while we don't make a full marriage during the days of the Omer, technically speaking, to make kiddushin alone, you would be allowed to do. Now again, it's not negaya to us, because we do kiddushin and nisuin at the same time. We don't divide them up. Continues the Mechaber, the nisuin nami, and as far as nisuin itself, even though the minig is that we don't make a nisuin during the days of the Omer, still and all, misha kafatz v'kanas, if somebody got up and did make a chasunah illicitly, he wasn't supposed to, but he got up, and despite this minig, he went ahead and he made a chasunah during the days of the Omer, ein ein shenoisai. We don't punish him for doing so. Now let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and olive, shaloi lisa isha. The minig is that we do not make a chasunah. The Chavetz Chaim points out, ve'ein chiluk, there's no difference in halacha, bein nisuin shal mitzvah, whether this nisuin, this marriage, is really a marriage of mitzvah. What does that mean? Kegain she'ein loy banim. For instance, let's say you have a man who has no children, so he was not yet mekayim the mitzvah of Berurah Ravu. So he really has a tzivui to get married and to be Isaac in Period of Arivia. So it's a real mitzvah for him to get married. You might think, okay, maybe in such a case, it's a real nisuin shal mitzvah. Maybe that you're allowed to do during the Omer. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. There's no difference between the nisuin shal mitzvah or a case where somebody already has children. In all cases, we don't make a minig, we don't make a chasunah, because that is the widespread minig in our regions, that we do not make any difference. However, if somebody wants to take back a wife that he had divorced, that's mutter to do during the Yemei sefirah, she'enoi kol kach simcha, because over there's not such a great simcha. This couple was already married previously. Of course, the halacha is that when a Yiddish couple gets divorced, they're allowed to remarry so long as the wife never married somebody else after the termination of her first marriage. So as long as she didn't have a marriage to somebody else, he could take her back. So to do that during the Yemei sefirah, the Chavetz Chaim tells me that is mutter. Eyes cut and bays. Mipnei sheba oisay zman, the Mechaber told us the reason for this minig not to make chasunahs is because this is the time period when the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva died. What the Mechaber wants to tell me here is, since this is the time period that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva passed away, ve'ein roi laharbois b'simcha. It's not a time that you should be marbe b'simcha. It's not a time to go make celebrations. Umikom makom, nevertheless, if something happens during this time period when a person has to make a shehechayanu, yavarech, he's allowed to make a shehechayanu. Now this is an interesting lashon that the Chavetz Chaim has here. His lashon is im nizdamen loy eze inyan shetzarich levarech. If it happens that something occurred that he has to make a shehechayanu, he's allowed to make a shehechayanu. How about if something didn't just happen? Are you allowed to do something that is mechayev you in making a shehechayanu? Are you allowed to buy a chashav keli? That's something that you would make a shehechayanu on. Are you allowed to do that? So the other poskim seem to have a difference of opinion. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says that this lashon of the Chavetz Chaim is lav dafka. He doesn't mean in this damaloi, if it just happens to happen, but you shouldn't seek it out. Chaim Kanievsky says you're allowed to do even lechatchila. You're allowed to do something that requires you to make a shehechayanu, and I believe that was also the ruling of Rav Moshe Zechet Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, that there's no problem of making shehechayanus during the sefirah. Ice cut and gimel. The Mechaber told us that while we don't make a nisuin, we don't make a full-fledged chasunah during sefirah, la'aresu l'kadesh shaper dami. To make the first stage of marriage, just kedushin, that's mutter. And the Chavetz Chaim says here in Ice cut and gimel, why? Why is that mutter? Kedushin is also a celebration, so why do we make a kedushin? Shema yikadmenu acher. Because so long as a man doesn't make kedushin with a woman, she could go get married to somebody else. Now, once he makes kedushin, even before he completes the marriage with nisuin, she's already usher to everybody else. So once he takes her with kedushin, she can't marry somebody else. Chavetz Chaim explains the reason you're allowed to make kedushin during the Omer is shema yikadmenu acher, because so long as you don't make kedushin, she could go have kedushin with somebody else. You want to tie her down, so kedushin you're allowed to make. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. And when you make the kedushin, that's erison. When you make the kedushin, erison is another word for kedushin. You're allowed to make a seuda. You're allowed to make a chasunah. You're allowed to celebrate the kedushin. And nowadays, nowadays when we do kedushin and nisuin at the same time, Mikamokai mutter lasoi shiduchin velasoi suuda. You're allowed to make a shidduch. You're allowed to make what we call a vart. But not only a vart, he says velasoi suda. You're allowed to make a suda by the vart. Now, suda in halacha means with pas. It means you're washing. It's a bona fide suda. So the Chavetz Chaim is telling you here, you're allowed to get engaged. There's no halachic status to what we call engaged. Engaged is nothing. Engaged is not kedushin. Like we said before, kedushin is areach ukudeshes libet abasu kudas moshe Yisrael. What we call engaged is nothing. It's just an agreement that at some point there's going to be a chasunah. You're allowed to get engaged, and not only are you allowed to get engaged, that's what he means. Lasui shiduchin, you could go get engaged, and you can make a suda to celebrate the engagement. Aval, however, lasui rikudin umachalois nagu iser, to dance by the vart, that you're not allowed to do. That's rikudin umachalois. And the Paiskim say that rikudin umachalois, these two lashonos, which both refer to dancing, refer to different types of dancing. Could be rikudin is only two people dancing together. Mechalois is when you dance in a circle, a lot of people dancing together. That's mechalois. On that, nagu iser. V'chol shekain b'shar rikudin umachalois shal rishus bevada yesh lizayer. Certainly, other types of gatherings where we have dancing. If it's dancing only you shall rishus, people want to have a party and they want to dance by the party. That certainly is something which should not be done during sefirah. Ois Katan Dalet, the Mechaber told us that while you're not allowed to make a nesuin, let's say somebody goes ahead and makes a chasunah during sefirah in defiance of halacha. So the Mechaber told us, Ein einchanaisai, you do not punish him. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this concept that you don't punish somebody for defying the halachas of sefirah, hainu dafka b'nisuin, that's only by a chasanah, she'asa al kol panim mitzvah, because at least getting married is a mitzvah. So it's true that he's defying halacha, but at least he's defying the halacha while he's being mekayim a mitzvah to get married. Avalim nistaper b'mei ha'omer, but somebody who goes and takes a haircut during the days of the omer, which is not a mitzvah at all, it's simply a dvar rishus, it's something optional. Then the minig was to penalize and to punish somebody for doing so. Now, there's a very interesting Igros Moshe. The Yeshiva Zatzal writes here in a tshuva, this lashon of the Mechaber, when the Mechaber says that if somebody goes ahead and makes a chasunah during the Omer, ein einshanoisa, you do not punish him. Okay, how about, are you allowed to go to the chasunah? So you get a chassid invitation, and the chassid invitation says on it that the chassid is going to be on the 21st day of the Omer. And you know that according to any minig, you're not allowed to make a chassid during the 21st, on the 21st day of the Omer. So you say to yourself, a chutzpah, somebody's making a chassid during Tzviras Omer, I'm certainly not going to go. Rav Moshe writes in the tshuva that you're allowed to go to the chassid. Why? What's his cheshbon? He says, because ein lecha einish gedola mizu. That would constitute a punishment. You're punishing him by not coming to the chasunah. Certainly, he wants people to come to the chasunah. So if you choose not to go to the chasunah, you're punishing him. Like this, a person would say, chutzpah, I'm going to go to a chasunah. Somebody's making a chasunah during the sefirah. Says Rav Moshe, you're allowed to go to the chasunah. Okay, now we go weiter. Let's go to the Ramah. So before I read the words of the Ramah, what do we have so far here from the Mechaber? So far, the Mechaber told me that there's an inyan during Sfiras HaOmer that we don't make chasunahs. And when is this time period that we don't make chasunahs? Between Pesach and Shavuos until Lag BaOmer. So that means the first day of the Omer is on the second day of Pesach. So that's when you start counting the Omer. On Pesach itself, you're not going to make a chasunah. So from Pesach to Shavuos, from Pesach until Lag BaOmer, no chasunahs. Hago, says the Ramah. Miu, however, milag ba'omer ve'elech, according to this Mechaber, according to the minig of the Mechaber, when the Mechaber is telling you that the part of sefirah where we're noyeg avelus is from the beginning of sefirah until lag ba'omer, so that is the entire period of avelus of sfiras omer. Miul milag ba'omer ve'elech, but from lag ba'omer and on, hakol shari, everything is mutter. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Hakol Shari. Everything is mutter from Lag BaOmer until Shavuos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, not so fast. Hainu la'oisan hanoyagin l'saper milamed gimel ba'omer ve'elech u'kedelakamei b'sif beis. This question of what the time period of the Avelus of Sefirah Ha'omer is still, we're going to go into it in Sif Beis in great detail, and we're going to see a bunch of different minhagim. So says the Chavetz Chaim over here, this Ramah that says that everything is mutter from Lag BaOmer and on until Shavuos, hold it. That's according to this minig that Mechaber just said, that Sefirah Ha'omer, that the Isurim of Sefirah Ha'omer run until Lag BaOmer, and then after Lag BaOmer, everything is mutter. So Hainu La'oisan Hanoyagin, this is according to those who have the minig, L'saper, that they're allowed to take haircuts, Milag BaOmer ve'elech, from Lag BaOmer and on. Ukedelakamei b'sif beis. Aval, however, Lididan, according to most of us, says the Chavetz Chaim, Shanoyhagin Iser b'tispeiris, who hold that you're not allowed to take haircuts after Lag BaOmer, Ukedelakamei b'sif gimel, like the minig that we're going to see later on in Sif Gimel, Aser gam kein lisa. Then after Lag BaOmer, you're not allowed to get married either. The nisuin v'tispeiris dinechad lahem, because the halachas that govern taking haircuts during Sefirah Ha'omer and the halacha that governs getting married during Sefirah Ha'omer are one and the same. If you're allowed to take a haircut, you're allowed to get married. If you're not allowed to take a haircut, you're not allowed to get married. So, what did the Chavetz Chaim say here? The Shulchan Aruch told us that we don't make chasunahs, and we also don't take haircuts, but he just didn't say that halacha yet. We're noyeg a certain amount of avelus from the beginning of Sefirah until Lag BaOmer. And then from Lag BaOmer and on, everything is mutter. Jumps in the Ramah, and the Ramah said, and the Ramah said, yeah, from Lag BaOmer and on, everything is mutter. Jumps in the Chavetz Chaim, and the Chavetz Chaim says, whoa, not so fast. You just saw a Ramah here that says that everything is mutter from Lag BaOmer and on. That's only according to this first minig that there are no Isurim of Sefirah Ha'omer after Lag BaOmer. But we're going to see that there are minhagim, that there are Isurim of Sefirah after Lag BaOmer. So basically, the Chavetz Chaim is saying, hold your horses. And also, yesh kula leminhagenu. While I'm just telling you that according to our minig, after Lag BaOmer, there are things that are still aser, there's also a kula, according to the minig, that there's iser after Lag BaOmer. And that is that if we hold iser after Lag BaOmer, then we have a time period of heter at the beginning of Sefirah until Rosh Chodesh. Olinin Rosh Chodesh Gufa, and as far as Rosh Chodesh itself, Yavur b'Sif Gimel, that will explain in Sif Gimel. V'tam le'elu shneim minhagim, and the reasons for these two different minhagim, Yavur le'kamei, will be discussed later in the Bir Halacha. And even according to those who hold that the Isurim of Sefirah Ha'omer do pertain in the beginning of Sefirah Ha'omer until Rosh Chodesh, Mikamakam still in all, Rosh Chodesh b'Shabbos, if Rosh Chodesh Iyar falls out on a Shabbos, since you have Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos falling out on the same day, Yesh lahater lehistaper be'erev Shabbos b'nei Shabbos. In such a case, it would be mutter to take a haircut on Erev Shabbos l'chvayda Shabbos. You would also be allowed to make a chasunah, since the chasunah suda will be on Shabbos, and it's Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so we already got the first inkling over here that there's more than one minig governing the Isurim of Sefirah Ha'omer. So just, I feel it necessary to recapture over here Sif Aleph. The Mechaber introduced to us the concept of Avelus during Sefirah Ha'omer. And he told us that it runs from the beginning of Sefirah Ha'omer until Lag BaOmer. The Ramah jumped in and said, according to that minig, after Lag BaOmer until Shavuos, everything is mutter. The Chavetz Chaim jumped in, and the Chavetz Chaim said, hold your horses. You see a Ramah over here that says that after Lag BaOmer until Shavuos, everything is mutter, hold it. That's only according to this minig of the Mechaber, that the beginning of Sefirah until Lag BaOmer, everything is aser, and after Lag BaOmer, everything is mutter. However, realize that there's another minig that says that in the beginning of Sefirah, from Pesach until Rosh Chodesh, you don't have the Isurim of Sefirah Ha'omer. And according to that minig, then the Isurim of Sefirah continue after Lag BaOmer. So we have to wait and see what the different minhagim are. Now let's go to Sif Beis. So far, everything that we discussed as far as isurim during the Omer was couched in terms of chasunahs. Is that the only iser? Is the only iser making chasunahs? Says the Mechaber in Sif Beis, Nayhagim shaloi lehistaper ad lamed gimel Omer. The minig is not to take haircuts until Lag BaOmer. Why? What's Lag BaOmer? Sha'omrim sha'oz pasku milamus. The reason why the iser of taking haircuts and the iser of making chasunahs, the reason it ends on Lag BaOmer, according to this minig, is because these people say that that's when the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. So therefore, that's when the iser runs until. However, ve'en lehistaper ad yom lamed daled baboker. But, says the Mechaber, again according to this minig, when could you take a haircut? Not on Lag BaOmer. You could take a haircut during the day of the 34th day of the Omer, Lamed Daled. Now, we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah, I'm going to jump the gun and tell it to you over here for a proper understanding of the Mechaber. The Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that this minig that the Mechaber just said is based on the notion that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva really stopped dying on Lamed Daled. They didn't stop dying on Lamed Gimel. They stopped dying on Lamed Daled. Therefore, you could take a haircut on Lamed Daled. Why could you take a haircut on Lamed Daled? Because Miktas Hayom Kikulai. So we're noyig iser, no haircuts on the night going into Lamed Daled, the night after Lamed Gimel, no haircuts. But then in the morning after Neitzach Hama, Miktas Hayom Kikulai. So now you could already start taking haircuts on Lamed Daled. That's the Mechaber. Elim came Chal Yom Lamed Gimel Erev Shabbos. However, if Lamed Gimel falls out on Erev Shabbos, so Lamed Daled would be on Shabbos. Sha'oz mistaprim by mipnei kvaid HaShabbos. Then you're allowed to take a haircut on Lamed Gimel because of kvaid HaShabbos. Well, what does this mean because of kvaid HaShabbos? Because what's happening over here is Lamed Daled is when you would normally be allowed to take a haircut, but Lamed Daled is Shabbos. So now it's Shabbos and it's Lamed Daled, and you have long hair, which is not covered Shabbos. And you'll say, well, the reason I have long hair is because it's the Omer. Yeah, but today is Lamed Daled in the Omer. So as far as the Omer is concerned, there's no reason for you to have long hair. So why do you have long hair? Oh, I have long hair because yesterday was Lamed Gimel, and on Lamed Gimel, according to the Mechaber, I'm not allowed to take a haircut yet. But that's no excuse. If Shabbos is Lamed Daled, then really on Shabbos, you should have short hair. Because on Lamed Daled, you're allowed to cut your hair. You're not allowed to cut your hair because of Shabbos, to cut your hair Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos is Lamed Gimel. So when Mater Lamed Gimel, L'chvaid HaShabbos. Since Lamed Daled, since Shabbos is Lamed Daled, and on Lamed Daled, there's no excuse for you to have long hair. Because on Lamed Daled, really, you're allowed to cut your hair. So cut your hair on Lamed Gimel, L'chvaid HaShabbos. So again, this is the Mechaber, who says that you could cut your hair on Lamed Daled during the day. Hagah, says the Ramah, Uve Medinais Elu, in our regions, Ein Hagin Kidvarov, we don't do what the Mechaber just said, that you're not allowed to cut your hair until the day of Lamed Daled. Elam istaprim b'yom Lamed Gimel. We hold that you could take a haircut already on Lamed Gimel. Umarbin by k'tas simcha. And we're also noig a little bit simcha on Lamed Gimel ba'omer. And it's clear from the words of the Darkei Moshe, that's the Ramah on the Torah, that the reason for this simcha, and the Ramah says over here, that we're noyik tzas simcha on Lamed Gimel, it has nothing to do with Rishon Bar Yochai. It has to do with the fact that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. That's why we're noyik tzas simcha, according to the Ramah. Ve'ein oimer by tachdon, and we don't say tachdon on Lamed Gimel ba'omer. Ve'ein lehistaper ad Lamed Gimel ba'atzmai. However, you're not allowed to take a haircut the night going into Lamed Gimel. You have to wait until the day of Lamed Gimel. V'loimi be'erev, not the previous evening. Okay, so again, this was a big mouthful. So the Mechaber said over here, and again, this is the meaning of the Mechaber, that no chasunahs until Lamed Gimel ba'omer, no haircuts until Lamed Gimel ba'omer. Now, what does that mean until Lamed Gimel ba'omer? It means for the entire day of Lamed Gimel ba'omer and the night of Lamed Daled. But Lamed Daled during the day already you're allowed to take a haircut. Why? Because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on Lamed Daled. Miktas Hayom Kikulai. You kept Avelus part of the day of Lamed Daled. Now during the day on Lamed Daled you could already take a haircut. The Ramah said we're not noig to wait till the day of Lamed Daled. We're noig to wait till the day of Lamed Gimel. On the day of Lamed Gimel, you could already take a haircut. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, because the Ramah is going with those people who hold that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva really stopped dying on Lamed Gimel, not on Lamed Daled. Let's jump into the Mishnah Berurah. Eis Katan Vav. The Ramah said, the Mechaber said, Ad Lamed Gimel La'omer, Ad Va'ad Bechlal. When he says until Lamed Gimel, he means until and including Lamed Gimel. V'hainu Ad Lamed Gimel Yamim Shleimim. This means until the completion of 33 complete days. Kol Echad Leila V'yomai. Each day, it's night and it's day, including Lamed Gimel, the night of Lamed Gimel and the full day of Lamed Gimel. Masha'en Ken Yom Lamed Daled. But the 34th day, we don't need to keep the night and the day. Lo Yichmiru B'Kim B'Layla B'Lvad. The day of 34, we only have to keep the night of 34. However, in the morning of Lamed Daled, after sunrise, mutter, then already you could take a haircut. Why? The miktas hayom kikulei. And the Mechaber said, what's the reason for this? Because they say that's when the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. And even though they were still dying on day 34 of the Omer, and that's why you can't take a haircut the night of 34 until sunrise of the day of 34. Could be that for the most part they stopped dying on day 33. And on day 34 only some people died. And that's why on 34 we say Mitzvah Sayam Kikulai, and day 34 you can take haircuts. That was the Mechaber. And then the Ramah said, no, the Ramah said we could already take a haircut B'Yom Lamed Gimel, on the day of the 33rd day of the Omer. Because the Ramah said, the Ramah was going according to those who believe that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying completely on the day of 33. Ve'ein Oimrim by Tachdon. We turn to Tadik Tesam and Beis. Gam be'erev Shalamed Beis. Not only do you not say Tachdon on Lamed Gimel, you don't say Tachdon already by Mincha on Lamed Beis. But you have to wait to take a haircut Eis Katan Yud Ad Lamed Gimel Ba'atzmai until the day of 33. Dainu Lachish Etani Tzakam after sunrise. Why do you have to wait? Because you don't take haircuts the night going into 33. Then we say Mitzvah Yom Kikulai, and now on the day of 33 you could start taking a haircut. Eis Katan Yud Aleph V'loimi Be'erev, but not the evening before. V'yesh me'achrayim shemakilim lehistaprei be'erev. There are those achrayim who are makel and say you could take a haircut already the night going into 33. V'siyam Eli Rabba. To become makam le'inyan l'suin lo'ira isi mekilin kiyim b'yom lamed gimel ba'omer ba'atzmai v'loy b'layla shalafanav. When it comes to the chasunahs, Eli Rabba says he didn't see anybody who was makel to say that you're allowed to make a chasunah the night of Lag Ba'omer. You have to make the chasunahs during the day of Lag Ba'omer. Achein, however, kishachal lamed gimel ba'omer be'erev Shabbos, if Lag Ba'omer is on erev Shabbos, v'hu lo yishasat chak l'asas b'yom, you can't really make a chasunah on Friday afternoon. That would be very difficult. After sheyesh lahakaloi lasos b'layla shalafanav, it could be that then you would be allowed to make a chasunah on the night going into 33. Okay. We continue in the words of the Ramah on the top of Tzadik Tesam and Beis. Miyu imchal b'yom rishon. If Lag Ba'omer falls out on a Sunday, naihagid lehistaper b'yom shishi, then the minig is that you're allowed to take a haircut already on Erev Shabbos, L'chvaid Shabbos, in honor of Shabbos. Let me just turn my volume down here. Okay. Omishu hu bal bris, somebody, a father of a son who's bringing a son to a bris milah. Mishu bal bris, Umishu hu bal bris. The bal bris, the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us, is a sandik, a moil, and the father. Aymal Benai, or somebody who's doing a milah on his son. Mutar lehistaper basfira l'chayna milah. He's allowed to take a haircut during sefirah l'chvaid the bris milah. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Yud Beis. Bal bris. Who's the bal bris? Hainu asandik. That's the sandik, the one who's going to hold the baby. V'hamoyel, the one who's actually doing the bris. V'avi aben, and the father of the child. Af she'ena moyeloi ba'atzmai. Even if he's not doing the milah himself. When the Ramah says somebody who's doing the milah on his son, it just means he has a son and he has to do a milah. but the one who we call the kvater, the one who's bringing the baby to and from the bris, he can't take a haircut. Ice cutting your gimel. These people, his taper b'sefirah, they're allowed to take a haircut. Hainu afilu b'yom shalafnei amila. They don't have to wait until the day of the bris itself. They could take the haircut already the day before the bris, samach la'erev, towards the evening, kaidam alicha lebeis hakneses, before Ma'ariv. V'mechala mila b'Shabbos. Let's say the mila is going to be a Shabbos bris. Mutaram lehistaper b'erev Shabbos. Then these people can take a haircut on erev Shabbos, afilu kaid b'chatzos, even before chatzos on erev Shabbos. Okay. So now we arrive to Sif Gimel. Before I embark on Sif Gimel, just realize that so far what we have over here is basically one minig of sefirah with a small tweak of a difference between the Mechaber and the Ramah. What we had so far is there's some level of a minig of avelus during sefirah that prevents you from making chasunahs, and it prevents you from taking haircuts, and it runs from Pesach until Lag BaOmer. What does that mean, that it runs from Pesach until Lag BaOmer? So according to the Mechaber, it means that you're allowed to take a haircut during the day of Lamed Daled. Why? Because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on Lamed Daled. Most of them stopped dying already on Lamed Gimel. There were a few deaths on Lamed Daled. Miktas Hayom Kikulai, once it's the morning of Lamed Daled, you could already take a haircut. According to the Ramah said that this minig of the Mechaber, that the Isser of Omer, sefirah Omer, runs through Lamed Gimel, it doesn't mean that you have to wait until Lamed Daled. It means you have to wait until the day of Lamed Gimel, because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on Lamed Gimel, and Miktas Hayom Kikulai, so you can take haircuts already during the day on Lamed Gimel. That's what we saw so far. Now let's go into Sif Gimel, and we'll see what we always talk about, the first zman and the second zman. And really, I think we're going to see three minhagim over here. Very interesting. Says the Mechaber in Sif Gimel. Yesh noihagim, there are those that have the minig, lehistaper b'rosh chodesh iyar, that they take haircuts on Rosh Chodesh iyar, v'tosu b'yadam, and this is a mistake. Says the Mishnah Berurah, a nice cut in Yodalid, yesh noihagim v'tosu b'yadam. So here we're going to have the first Chavetz Chaim that's going to start to lay out the first zman and the second zman. And we're going to go into a biur halacha that's going to spell it out more clearly. But first, let's see this Mishnah Berurah over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Avoyer b'kitzara. I will begin to explain this in a concise way. The Lekule Alma, according to everyone, Naihagin Isser Lamed Gimel Yomim, everybody agrees that there is a time period of Isser. There is a time period when we keep Avelus, a certain amount of Avelus, during sefirah, and that time period is 33 days. However, Yesh Bazeh Minhagim Shainim. Which days between Pesach and Shavuos comprise the 33 days? That's the subject of different minhagim. V'yesh l'chol echad tam, and each one of these minhagim has a reason. Yesh tam leminhagai kamavur b'biur halacha, and the reasoning for the different minhagim will be spelled out in the biur halacha. And there's a third minig that the Mishnah Berurah is going to mention in passing, where I'll give you the basis for it from an Igros Moshe. Continues the Mechaber, continues the Chavetz Chaim. Yesh shabacharu oisan. There are those, literally this means, there are those that choose the 33 days, but it doesn't mean that they choose them. It's not that it's open for choosing. It means that there are those that have the minig, they have the Messiah, that this is when people died. This is when Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died, and this is why we're knowing those 33 days. Yesha Bacharu Aisan, there are those that have the minig, Miyom Sheni Shal Pesach, from the first day of the Omer, which is the second day of Pesach, Ad Lamed Gimel B'Omer, until the 33rd day of the Omer. Umisham V'Hala Ad Shavuos, and from Lag BaOmer until Shavuos, like Kiblo Alayu Shom Iser. These people never accepted on themselves any Isurim from Lamed Gimel B'Omer until Shavuos. Because when is the Iser of Avelus during sefirah? It's from the beginning of sefirah until Lag BaOmer. It's those 33 days. Omnam, Ad Lamed Gimel B'Omer Ein Matirin Shum Yom. However, the Yeah. However, until Lag BaOmer, there are no days that are mutter. So the Isser of chasunahs, the Isser of haircuts, it runs from the second day of Pesach until Lag BaOmer. This is the minig that we saw in Sif Aleph and Sif Beis. That's the minig that we saw so far in the Mechaber and the Ramah, that the Isser of sefirah goes all the way until Lag BaOmer. And then we saw the difference between the Mechaber and the Ramah. According to the Mechaber, it means until during the day on Lamed Dalid. According to the Ramah, it means during the day on Lamed Gimel. That's a very simple minig. From the beginning of sefirah until Lag BaOmer, 33 days. None of those days are mutter. Very simple. However, v'yesh, but then there's another minig. V'yesh sheniku me'arbam v'tisha yemei ha'omer. There are those that subtract from the 49 days of the Omer, Shisha Asar Yamim Harishonim, the first 16 days. Tahainu Ad Yom Sheni Shal Rosh Chodesh Iyar, from the beginning of sefirah until and including the second day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. That gives you 16 days. They subtract those 16 days. Umisham Vahala Ad Shavuos. And then from the second day of Iyar until Shavuos, Shehu Lamed Gimel Yamim, which is 33 days, Ein Matirim Shum Yom. None of those days are mutter. Levad me Lamed Gimel BaOmer Atzmai, with the exception of Lag BaOmer, Hitiruhu B'Miktsasai, they made a heter for part of the day of Lag BaOmer. What does it mean, part of the day? Not the night going into Lag BaOmer, the daytime period of Lag BaOmer. Umishum demitzas yom kekulai. Then, okay, so you have the first minig. The first minig is from the beginning of sefirah until either the day of Lamed Gimel or the day of Lamed Dalet. So it's either those 33 days, or it's the 33 days from Beis Iyar all the way until Shavuos, with the exception of the day of Lag BaOmer. The nimtza, and it comes out, says the Chavetz Chaim, if somebody would grab the rope from both ends, what that means is, Dahainu, shemekel b'rosh chodesh iyar v'gam mekel milamed gimel v'hala, if somebody is going to be noyeg heter in the beginning of sefirah until Rosh Chodesh and including Rosh Chodesh, and then he's going to be noyeg heter from Lag BaOmer until Shavuos, talis hu b'yadai. That's simply a mistake, because you're not getting 33 days. I think at this point, we'll jump into the Biur Halacha, because we just mentioned these two zmanim, and now the Biur Halacha is going to spell out to us what the basis for these two different zmanim are. So let's take a look at the Biur Halacha here. Dibur HaMaschil yesh nehagim v'taz hu b'yadam. Sorry that my phone keeps ringing here. I thought I turned my volume down. I don't know why it's ringing. Okay. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Biur Halacha. Biur ha'inyan. The explanation of this topic is as follows. The yesh bazeh shalosh shitos. We're going to have three different opinions over here in what the Zman Isser of Sefirah Ha'omer is. Unevar shtayim mehem shenaktam ha'paiskim ledina. And I'm going to explain out to you here in this Biur Halacha the two main minhagim that the paiskim deal with. And then there's a third. I'm not sure we're going to get to it today. If not, we'll get to it tomorrow. First is one opinion. One opinion is that for 34 days, the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were dying. And there's a raya from the Medrash, that they were dying from Pesach until Prois Atzeres. What does that mean, Prois Atzeres? That means until 15 days before Shavuos. When you subtract 15 days from 49, 49 minus 15 gives you 34. So you have 34 days that they died. However, we have this rule that Miktsas Hayom Kikulai, and therefore we can take haircuts on day 34. And then after that, you could get married and you could take haircuts. V'zeh dasa mechaber b'sif aleph and sif beis, and that's the opinion of the mechaber that we saw earlier in sif aleph and sif beis. Very simple. For 34 days, the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were dying, and those 34 days were from Pesach until 15 days before Shavuos, which means until Lamed Daled Ba'omer, and that's why the mechaber says you can't marry anyone and you can't take haircuts until the daytime of Lamed Daled. Achein l'das haRamah sham. But let's remember that the Ramah said in the beginning of this Siman, B'sif Beis, Mashviv the sefirah lay the paskim ilamas b'yam lamed gimel. The Ramah held that they didn't die for 34 days; they died for 33 days. U'kamoisha kasav hagrasham, like the Gra writes over there, or mixas hayom kikulai. So on day 33 on lamed gimel b'omer we say mixas hayom kikulai. U'lefi shitazu haminik shed mistapid mi pesach ad yom lamed gimel b'boker. And according to this opinion, you can't take haircuts until the daytime of day 33. And from then on until Shavuos, everything is mutter. So boom, here you have the first zman. What's the first zman of sefirah? Depending on the mechaber or the Ramah, according to the mechaber, it's until the daytime of day 34. According to the Ramah, it's until the daytime of day 33. And from then till Shavuos, everything mutter. Very simple. That's the first zman. Shita shniyahu. Then there's the second zman. What's the second opinion? This is something that is brought down in the name of the Bali Taisvis. And what's that? The Talmidei Rabbi Akiva Meisu Lamed Gimel Yamim Shleimin, that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, Taka, were dying for 33 days. But the 33 days were not those 33 days. Which 33 days was it? And it wasn't even 33 days in a row. They died for 33 days between Pesach and Shavuos. But which 33 days? Dahainu, b'yom she'ein oimrim tachnun loy mesu. Any of the days between Pesach, between the first day of sefirah, between the second day of Pesach and Shavuos, any day during that time period, that's a little bit of a day of simcha, and therefore we don't say tachnun on those days, loy mesu. On those days, the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva didn't die. In other words, they died for 33 days between the second day of Pesach and Shavuos, but the Rabbeinu Shalom did not have anybody die on a day of Simcha, so they didn't die on any of the days that we don't say Tachnun. Oh, which days are that we don't say Tachnun? Imkain, if so, Kishetaitzi Shivas Yemei Pesach, so you have to take out the 7 days of Pesach, Dahainu Miyom Sheni Shel Pesach, so you start from the second day of Pesach, you get 7 days, the 7 days of Pesach. V'oid shisha Shabbosos, right? Because in Chutz La'aretz you have 8 days. V'oid shisha Shabbosos, and then you have 6 days of Shabbos. So 7 plus 6 is 13. So far you have 7 days of Pesach that you don't say Tachnun, 6 days of Shabbos that you don't say Tachnun. So far you have 13 days. Ushnei Yomim Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Then you have 2 days Rosh Chodesh Iyar, right? So now you have 15 days. V'yom echad Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and then you have Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Shaloi Mesu. On those 16 days, they didn't die. So that's how you have 33 days that they died. Oh, Imkain, Hare Nisharu Laman Gimel Shleiman. So now you're left with 33 complete days, Shemesu, during which the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva did die. Ulafizeh, and according to this, Mesu ad Atzeres. So it turns out the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva did die during different days, all the way from Pesach until Shavuos. But they weren't in a row, because they didn't die on the 7 days of Pesach. Then they started dying. They didn't die on the 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Then they started dying again. They didn't die on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and then they started dying again. But they died on 33 days that ran all the way from Pesach all the way till Shavuos. Uleneged elu alamed gimel yamim, and commensurate with these 33 days that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died, Kibbul Yisrael al Atzmam. So because of those 33 days, Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves 33 days of Avelus during this time period. But which 33 days? One of those 33 days were Noyig Heter for part of the day, and they chose for that day Lamed Gimel Ba'omer. For some reason, they picked day 33. Linyan Tispiris Vinasuin, so that you can take haircuts and you can make chasunahs on day 33. Dahainu, but we still didn't say which 33 days. Dahainu, Lenakois bimem tes yom shala omer tes zayin yomim arishonim. So according to this minig, you knock out 16 days. Which 16 days do you knock out? You knock out the first 16 days. Tahainu miyom sheni shel Pesach. Which 16 days are that? It's from the second day of Pesach ad yom sheni shel Rosh Chodesh Iyar, until and including the second day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Yesh tezayin yomim. That's 16 days. Sha'isen yomim mekilin behen. On those days we're lenient and we allowed haircuts. V'nisharu lamed gimel shleimin ad atzeres. So now you're left with 33 days until Shavuos. U'misablen behen. And on those days we have a little bit of avelus and we don't take haircuts and we don't have chasunahs. So now, according to this minhag, if somebody is going to be noyeg heter from Lag BaOmer and on, the Gamba Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and he's also going to be noyeg heter on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, Tasu b'yadam. That's a mistake. The lek lamed gimel yom, because then you don't have 33 days. V'zeu kavanas hamechaber, and that's what the mechaber means in the beginning in Sif Gimel when he says yesh nehagim lehistaper Rosh Chodesh Iyar v'tasu b'yadam. There are those that take haircuts on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and that's a mistake. So now that we saw this beer halacha, let me just recapture what are the two zmanim laid out here in the beer halacha. So the first zman is those who are of the opinion that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died during sefirah, and they died through either Lamed Gimel or Lamed Dalet. According to the Mechaber, they stopped dying on Lamed Dalet. According to the Ramah, they stopped dying on Lamed Gimel. That's the first man. So during that time period, from the beginning of Sefirah Sa'omer until either the daytime of Lamed Gimel, according to the Ramah, or the daytime of Lamed Dalet, according to the Mechaber, you're not allowed to take haircuts, you're not allowed to make chasunahs, because that's the time period that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. That's the first man. What's the second zman? The people who hold of the second zman, they have the Messiah that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died for 33 days. Which 33 days did they die? They died during the 33 days of Sefirah Sa'omer, the 33 days that run from Pesach until Shavuos, the 33 days on which we say Tachnun. But they didn't die on any of the 16 days that we don't say Tachnun on. So they didn't die on the 7 days of Pesach. They didn't die on the 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. They didn't die on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So they died for 33 days. So Klal Yisrael knew that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died for 33 days. So they decided that they have to be Noyeg Avelus for 33 days. Which days did they decide to be Noyeg Avelus? They decided to lop off the first 16 days of Sefirah. So that means that they lopped off through the second day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And during those days, you could take haircuts. But then from Beis Iyar all the way until Shavuos, they were Noyeg Iser. And that gives you the second zman. We're going to go into this, we're going to tweak this a little bit tomorrow, and hopefully we'll conclude this Siman tomorrow and catch up to the Dirshu schedule. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The schus of Liman HaTorah should stand ganz Klal Yisrael in good stead. And Rabban Hashem should send Yeshuas and Refuas and Parnasa. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. See you, Mir Hashem, on Sunday. Be well.